Next we have Mary Plummer. She's representing Blackmagic Design. Mary is an editor, an audio artist, a composer, trainer, and an author who just recently joined Blackmagic Design. She's going to tell us about what's new with DaVinci Resolve, and she has a particular expertise in Fairlight audio, so she's going to tell us about that. That's a company that's just been acquired by Blackmagic.
Right. So hi, how are you guys? It's good to be here. I think the official title for this little section was migrating from Final Cut Pro 7 to DaVinci Resolve. So just out of curiosity, any of you out there migrating? I love the sound of migrating because it kind of sounds like a lot of editors out there in the wild searching for a nice place a nice environment to work, right? Well, so sometimes you'll find just the right fit and sometimes you don't. I know there's quite a few refugees out there who are still testing different things. And I have friends in the industry who are still clinging to their Final Cut 7 setups going, all right, let me just finish this project and then I'm ready. And I can't tell you how many then I'm ready. Okay, now, no, not yet. And believe me, I was very proficient in Final Cut 7. And as with many people, you have to use the tools that are available or you have to use whatever tools the job demands. As an editor, when I started, I was on the very first nonlinear system, film, like Ramy. And I also worked on, you name it, I've used it. So I'm very familiar with what's out there. And there's certain things about it that you get used to after a while. I would say that, as an editor, one of the things to think about when you're working with whether it's Final Cut or whatever you're using is, what are you expecting when you get into your nonlinear editing system? And in a lot of ways, it's like driving a car. Any drivers? Anybody? Right? And so, and then you drive someone else's car or you drive a rental. When I first time I decided to try DaVinci Resolve 14, it was actually 12.5. It was just a few months ago before the change, and I was still an editor, and I was getting ready to go for a project. I was like, okay, I'm going to use this new thing. I better give myself a day to get up to speed. Again, remember, I was proficient in Final Cut 7 among all sorts of other editing applications out there. And I gave myself a full day, and I was way off, okay? Because I sat down with it, and I'm not kidding, 5 minutes, I was up to speed. I was flying through it, and I said, how is this so easy? That's because it has that familiar look and feel. It's like when you drive that rental car, you get in. How long do you need to get ready on that rental car? Just about the 5 minutes from where you leave the parking spot. You fidget around until you get to the checkout, and then by then you're on the road, whether you're ready or not. It was the same kind of thing. And so that was one of the things I found really exciting about it, was how quickly I was able to get into it. This is DaVinci Resolve 14. Again, anyone familiar with DaVinci so far? Well, if you're not, it should look familiar because, like the car, there's certain things you would expect in a nonlinear editing system, and that's what you're going to see here. Anyway, you'll see what you expect. So you've got your source and your video, your source monitor, you have your timeline monitor, you have your timeline, here's your browser. So all of this should look familiar no matter what you're using. And the one thing I want to clarify is, even though this may look and feel very familiar to Final Cut 7, it is absolutely not a copy. This is, in and of itself, a unique editing system, and there are a lot of features under the hood, and that's not counting your world-class color correction that you'll have in the color page or your full digital. This is your full audio workstation right here where you can do all of your audio mixing and editing as well. So all of that is baked into the same program. All we're going to talk about right now is the edit page, because that's where we're really about when it comes to transitioning as an editor. So let's look at something. Let's actually go in here and talk about it a little bit. And one of the things I was going to say is I'm going to talk to you about this as if you were actually one of those migrators from Final Cut 7 or any nonlinear editing system. One of the first things you ought to know is how to get around. And in the timeline, you have your J, K, and L keys, just like you may use in any other system, and so you can navigate really quickly, one-handed, no mouse necessary. You also, of course, have your transport controls, which would be on both the monitors, and you can scrub your playhead. Again, everything that you would expect, it's in there. So you also happen to notice, and I'm in my default layout right now, pulling down my audio just a bit, so you can see I have 2 different tracks of video. Zooming is going to be exactly the same. And just like you might in another system or in Final Cut, I can layer my different video, and that way I can add just drag the edges, and I can add opacity right there. So I can instantly add a fade from one track to the other for some simple compositing. So those are the types of things you may be used to. Very easy. Let's go to another timeline. And by the way, those shortcuts that you used to know when you were in Final Cut 7, the function keys for editing that you might have used, or the shortcuts for what I just used, Shift-Z to fit your timeline to the window, your zooming, and all of those shortcuts are the same. So let's look at our tools for a second. I'm going to zoom in here. Go a little bit more. And you can see there's just 3 tools. It's that simple. You have your selection tool, which is for dragging and moving things around. If you trim with that, you're going to leave gaps in your timeline, but that may be what you want to do at the time. So it's exactly what you would expect. You have a trimming tool, which is going to allow you to do your finessing. So that's where you're going to be just doing some quick shortcut trimming, and I'll show you that in just a second. And of course, you have your blade. How many blade editors do we have? You know, the drag drop blades. There's nothing wrong with it. Especially if you started in film and if you're used to getting in there and physically dragging things around, well, you can. So you have that option. Also right here, you'll see 3 other buttons. We have our insert, overwrite, and replace edits. Those are the 3 most common, and that's exactly where you would expect to find them. So easy to use. I'm going to go back to my selection tool. Here's my timeline. Again, I can move my playhead around, drag. If I want to grab a clip, I can move it. This is not magic, right? This is what you would expect. I can extend or I can shrink it, and let me zoom in a little bit more. Here I can add a trim, and I'm leaving a gap. So nothing to that either. So let's look at the other tool. Let's look at our trim tool. I'm going to back out. And with the trim tool, and the shortcut is just T, so you can bounce back and forth between the selection tool and the trim tool really easily. If I want to trim, what's nice about that is I can select the edit point, and I'll zoom in even further. Let's get really in there. And with the trim tool, I can, if you notice my cursor, it's all contextual, just like you would expect. So if I'm right there on the edit point, I'm going to see my roll edit, and if I click, I'll roll either direction. If I go to one side, it's going to ripple that footage. If I go to this side, it's going to ripple the other side. But you can also do it with shortcuts. So depending, if you were in Final Cut 7, depending the type of editor, if you're used to drag, drop, and blade, you're already there. If you used a lot of shortcuts, and you can also use those. So for example, the U key will toggle between the type of edits. Let me select my edit point again. If I use the U key, see how I can toggle between which type of edit, and I can also use the period and comma keys to make a trim based on what I happen to have selected. So you have all those choices, very simple. So if you were lightning fast before, you'll be lightning fast again. Like I said, 5 minutes. That's all it took for just being able to get in and start editing. Let's look at a couple other things. So also, while I'm in my trim tool, notice if I hover over a clip, it shows the handles of that clip. Do you see how I can see those handles? And I can, if I drag at the top of the clip, I can slip the footage to get exactly what I want. If I drag at the bottom, I'm actually sliding the clip. And that's all being just using the trim tool. So this is with no magic. This is with no extra training at this time. This is just dive in and get to work kind of editing. So that part you can count on. That's going to work for you every single time. Let's look at something else here. I'm going to go to another timeline for a sec. What's fun about this one is I want to add some transitions to this particular timeline. So I'm going to zoom in. Let's move up and down. Notice my up and down arrows will move. I'm fit to window, Shift-Z, just like I'd mentioned. I'm going to bring this down a hair. And with my selection tool, what's interesting is I can, with the selection tool, you're selecting your clips, and I can select them all to perform some form of edit. Or if I go to my trim tool, I can just drag across. And what did I just select? All of my transitions. And by selecting my transitions, I can trim them. I can put a gap in between them if I was going to do some hard cuts and I needed to put some black in between. Or I can actually add a transition. Why do you think the one's red? There's not enough media right there. That's right. So, but I can fix that. I already showed you how. That would be this clip right here, and I'll just just drag it, and I can slip the footage just a little bit. So I have some handles. That took, less than a second, and now I can drag all that across, and I can add a transition to all those at once. Shortcut Command-T, and now I have a cross dissolve between all the clips in this sequence. So it doesn't take very long. It'd be nice if you could actually see them. There. So the same shortcuts you might use to apply your transitions, and you can also, of course, right-click on any transition to make changes to that. So very easy. Let's look up here. We have an inspector, which is where you'd go in and you could make modifications to a particular clip. This is where your transforming and your cropping is. You also have a mixer on the page, which is handy for however many tracks you have. You can go in there and adjust the audio. I don't have very many on this particular timeline. If you're used to adding effects, you notice none of this is a big mystery, right? Because I think some people are like, wow, Resolve, it's so complicated. No, you just have to figure out what you need to do. If you're an editor, or if you are a camera operator or a cinematographer and you need to string together shots, then you can just put them together here. It's not that big of a deal. Just don't be afraid of what you don't know, and you'll figure the rest as you go, right? So over here on the left, I have my effects, and I'm going to hide the media pool for a second. There's my effects, so you could go in and you could look for different transitions. You could find filters, and you could choose something if you want to add a blur or whatever you might want to do. You can add that to your clips here, and everything's drag and drop. So especially if you want to get into some really fun things like wipes and those really classy effects, then just drag and drop, and whatever it is you want to use, drag and drop it right on. Let's go back to my timeline. So that part's fairly simple. Now I'm going to go to an empty timeline for a moment. So back to timelines. So this one's empty. So another thing people used to do and wish they could still do, and of course you can, it's common to edit your sequences together, and then you need to string all those sequences together. Well, instead of copy and paste, right here I'm just going to grab a timeline that's already done and drag it straight into an empty timeline. There. Now it is what we would have called in Final Cut a nested sequence. Right here it's a compound clip, but that is a string together selects. So that type of editing, if that's what you're used to, sequence into sequence or timeline into timeline as we'd call it here, piece of cake. And what if I want to take that apart though? Okay, I put that there, but what if I want the individual clips? Well, that's right click. You go up here and you do what's called decompose. Done. And so there is the same timeline. I just put in as a nested sequence, or in this case a compound clip, one timeline into the other, and I just decomposed it. If I wanted to put it back, let's say I finished a sequence, I want to go the other direction, select it, and I can go up and say compound clip, and it's a compound clip. So that workflow, if that's what you're used to, yes, you can do that too. So I have not found anything, and I've edited features and documentaries, trailers, music videos, you name it, and I have not found something I could not do in this NLE. So that was one of the things I got really excited about. It's like, oh, and it didn't take any time. So one of the things to think about is on the set, or people are already using DaVinci Resolve, the DITs are using it, right, for their storage and their media, and sometimes people go off somewhere else for their editorial. We now can do our audio and our color right here. A lot of people are finishing in Resolve, so where are you in the middle? So I dare you, or I tempt you to try this. I'm actually using the free download version for this demo, so you could download it for free. You can give it a try. You could just see, is this something that would work for our projects or for the future? So I think it's pretty exciting stuff, and it gives us an idea of what conformless post-production could possibly be. So thank you guys. I appreciate your time.
We'll have to have Mary back for another section completely on Fairlight.
Yes, I can't wait.
To cover that.
Yeah.
But people say, oh, nobody's trying to cut with Final Cut 7 anymore, but it happens.
Oh.
I just like a week ago, somebody said, the footage you gave me I can't cut it. What's wrong? Well, did you upgrade your Mac? Yeah.
Oh no, I talk to people every week who are still clinging to it, like I said. So
All right.
anyway, thank you
so much, Mary.